They were jumping overboard, trying to save their lives by swimming out into the middle of the ocean.
The submarine is virtually intact, resting nearly 400 feet underwater.
In 1944, a German submarine completed a near-impossible passage into the Mediterranean, yet vanished soon after without sending a single distress signal, leaving no trace or explanation behind.
A submarine had been found in the waters of Portofino. It was a submarine stuck underwater in the mud with its bow pointing upwards. I'd never seen anything like that before.
Decades later, advanced scanning technology reopened the case, and what it uncovered did not just explain the loss, but revealed something far more human. Life inside the steel coffin. Life aboard. 455 followed a rhythm that balanced long stretches of suffocating monotony with moments of sudden, uncontrollable fear, creating an environment where the human body and mind were constantly pushed to their limits. Inside a Type 7 submarine, roughly 50 men lived within a steel cylinder just over 67 meters long, where every available space was occupied by machinery, torpedoes, or tightly arranged bunks that crews rotated through in shared shifts. The absence of sunlight distorted time, while the air carried a permanent mixture of diesel fumes, oil, sweat, and damp metal, clinging to clothing and skin in a way that never fully faded. Fresh water was so limited that washing was considered a luxury, and meals were often eaten beside live torpedoes that doubled as storage surfaces, reinforcing the constant proximity to both survival and destruction. When submerged, the atmosphere became even more oppressive, as carbon dioxide levels slowly rose and temperatures increased, turning the interior into a humid, suffocating chamber where every breath felt heavier than the last. Conversations dropped to whispers whenever sonar pings echoed through the hull, signaling the presence of Allied destroyers above. And in those moments, the entire crew became acutely aware of how thin the barrier was between life and catastrophic failure. Despite propaganda portraying them as elite predators, many of these men were young and inexperienced, navigating a reality where survival depended less on heroism and more on endurance, discipline, and the fragile integrity of the steel surrounding them, a structure that could protect them just as easily as it could become their tomb. The impossible passage through Gibraltar. By early 1944, Germany's strategic position had deteriorated to the point where even the most dangerous missions were no longer optional, and U-455 was ordered into the Mediterranean to disrupt Allied supply routes, supporting campaigns in North Africa and Italy. Reaching that battlefield required passing through the Strait of Gibraltar, a narrow corridor monitored relentlessly by Allied aircraft, destroyers, radar stations, and defensive minefields that turned the crossing into one of the most perilous undertakings for any submarine crew. Commander Hans Heinrich Geisler prepared his men for a transit that would demand absolute precision, relying on Atlantic currents and careful navigation to reduce detection while keeping the submarine submerged for extended periods. Once beneath the surface, the vessel moved slowly and deliberately, often close to the seabed, as every sound inside the hull carried the risk of echoing outward into the surrounding water, where patrol ships actively searched for any anomaly. The crossing stretched into nearly 40 hours of continuous tension, during which carbon dioxide levels rose, temperatures increased, and fatigue set in as the crew remained on edge, listening for sonar pulses and distant engine noises that could signal imminent danger. Allied destroyers passed overhead at intervals, and although no direct engagement occurred, the threat of depth charges remained constant, creating a psychological pressure that was as dangerous as any physical weapon. When the 455 finally emerged into the Mediterranean, the crew had achieved what many considered nearly impossible. Yet that success carried an unspoken consequence, because the waters they had entered were no longer a hunting ground, but a controlled environment where survival would depend on avoiding detection rather than seeking combat. The disappearance. After entering the Mediterranean in late January 1944, U-455 received routine patrol orders directing it toward the Ligurian and Tyrrhenian seas, where Allied shipping lanes had become critical to sustaining military operations across southern Europe. The submarine's final confirmed transmission was unremarkable, a standard acknowledgement of instructions that gave no indication of mechanical failure, enemy contact, or any form of distress that might explain what followed. Then communication stopped entirely, not gradually or with fragmented signals, but with a complete and immediate silence that left German Naval Command with nothing to analyze or respond to. Days passed without updates, followed by weeks of unanswered calls, and eventually months in which U-455 failed to report back to base, forcing officials to categorize it as missing without any supporting evidence to clarify its fate. Speculation filled the void left by that silence, with some analysts suggesting the submarine had struck one of the many naval mines scattered across the Mediterranean, while others argued it had been detected and destroyed by Allied forces operating in the region. A smaller group pointed toward mechanical failure, proposing that internal damage or system malfunction could have led to an uncontrolled descent, though without wreckage, each theory remained equally unverified. For the families of the 50 men on board, the absence of answers became its own form of loss, as official letters confirmed disappearance but offered no explanation, leaving them with neither closure nor a location to mourn. Over time, U-455 transitioned from a military asset to a historical question, one that lingered unresolved for decades, suspended between possibility and uncertainty beneath the surface of the sea. The discovery beneath Genoa. In 2010, more than 6 decades after U-455 disappeared, the silence surrounding its fate finally began to fracture when Italian diver Roberto Rinaldi and his team encountered an unexpected structure resting on the seabed off the coast of Genoa. At a depth of roughly 400 feet, partially embedded in sediment, the outline of a submarine emerged from the darkness, its presence both unmistakable and deeply unsettling in its stillness. What immediately drew attention was not just the identity of the wreck, but its position, with the bow angled sharply upward as if the vessel had been caught mid-ascent, frozen in a final attempt to reach the surface. Unlike wrecks that settle gradually over time, this posture suggested abrupt interruption, a moment of motion violently halted, leaving the submarine suspended in a posture that hinted at desperation rather than surrender. Closer examination revealed details that transformed curiosity into unease, particularly the condition of the hatches, which were not simply closed but appeared sealed, as though structural deformation had locked them from the outside. This detail carried profound implications, indicating that the crew had remained inside during the final moments and that no successful escape had taken place before the submarine came to rest on the ocean floor. Divers documented the wreck and consulted naval historians, cross-referencing patrol routes, missing submarines, and archival records from German Naval Command, eventually confirming that the dimensions and location matched U-455. The discovery shifted the narrative from speculation to evidence. Yet even with a physical site identified, the exact sequence of events that led to the submarine's destruction remained unresolved, setting the stage for a deeper investigation that would rely not on human observation alone, but on emerging technological analysis. AI reconstruction of the final moments. For years after the wreck's discovery, U-455 remained a silent structure on the seabed, offering visual clues but resisting any definitive explanation of how its final moments unfolded. That changed in 2024, when a multidisciplinary team deployed advanced scanning systems combining sonar imaging, photogrammetry, and machine learning algorithms to reconstruct the submarine in 3 dimensions with a level of precision that human divers alone could never achieve. The resulting models allowed researchers to examine structural deformation patterns across the hull, revealing that the explosion originated in the stern section, consistent with either a mine detonation or a depth charge impact. However, the orientation of key components provided a more detailed narrative, as the ballast tanks showed clear signs of being actively blown and the diving planes were angled sharply upward, indicating that the crew had initiated an emergency ascent at the moment of impact. This reconstruction shifted the interpretation from a sudden destruction to a sequence of actions, showing that the crew had not been caught completely unaware, but had responded in real time, attempting to regain control and reach the surface. Interior mapping added another layer of insight, as the distribution of objects and structural distortions suggested movement within the submarine, particularly toward the forward compartments where escape routes were located. The forward torpedo room displayed evidence of multiple personnel converging in a confined space, while the hatch mechanism showed deformation consistent with external pressure and internal force, implying that the crew had attempted to open it, but were prevented by structural damage. In the control room, the positions of collapsed figures indicated that key personnel remained at their stations, maintaining command functions even as conditions deteriorated. By analyzing these patterns collectively, researchers concluded that a significant portion of the crew survived the initial explosion and remained conscious during the early stages of the submarine's descent, transforming the event from an instantaneous loss into a prolonged and deeply human struggle that unfolded in darkness beneath the surface. The final descent and screaming steel. As the 455 began its uncontrolled descent after the explosion, the surviving crew in the forward compartments would have experienced a gradual but unmistakable shift in their environment as the submarine moved beyond its designed operating limits and the surrounding pressure increased with every meter of depth. German Type 7 submarines were engineered to withstand depths of approximately 250 to 300 meters. But beyond that threshold, the steel hull itself would begin to deform under external pressure. This process was not silent, as survivors from other U-boat incidents later described a phenomenon known among crews as screaming steel, where the hull emitted sharp echoing sounds as it flexed and compressed, signaling that structural integrity was failing. Inside WWII 455, those sounds would have carried through the confined interior, amplifying the psychological weight of the situation and confirming to the crew that their chances of survival were rapidly diminishing. At the same time, water pressure would have continued forcing its way through compromised sections of the stern, while watertight doors temporarily slowed the flooding, creating a brief window during which the men in the forward compartments remained alive. The air would have grown hotter and more humid, mixed with rising carbon dioxide levels, as emergency breathing equipment was activated in an effort to extend the limited supply of breathable air. In those final minutes, the crew was not facing an abstract threat, but a series of escalating physical sensations: the sound of metal under strain, the vibration of the hull, and the realization that each passing moment brought them closer to depths where the submarine could no longer hold. The combination of structural failure, environmental pressure, and mechanical damage created a situation from which there was no viable escape, leaving the crew to confront the reality of their fate within a sealed structure that had become both their protection and their prison. Legacy, memory, and reframing the U-boat war. The discovery of U-455 and the insights gained through AI reconstruction have done more than resolve a long-standing historical mystery, as they have reshaped how the U-boat campaign itself is understood. During the war, German submarines were portrayed as instruments of precision and dominance, yet findings like these reveal a different reality, one defined by vulnerability, uncertainty, and the fragile boundary between control and catastrophe. For the families of the 50 men who never returned, the identification of the wreck provided a form of closure that had been absent for decades, even as it introduced new layers of emotional complexity. The confirmation that their relatives remained inside the submarine, combined with the detailed reconstruction of their final moments, transformed abstract loss into something far more tangible and difficult to process. International maritime authorities have since designated U-455 as a protected war grave, ensuring that the site remains undisturbed and treated with the respect afforded to those who died in service. Divers who encounter the wreck today approach it not as an object of exploration, but as a memorial, recognizing that beneath its corroded exterior lies a preserved moment of human history. More broadly, the use of artificial intelligence in underwater archaeology has introduced a new way of engaging with the past, allowing researchers to reconstruct events with a level of detail that bridges the gap between technical analysis and human experience. In the case of U-455, that approach has shifted the narrative from one of disappearance to one of understanding, revealing not only how the submarine was lost, but what its crew endured as the final moments unfolded. For decades, the ocean kept U-455's story buried beneath silence, preserving not only its wreck, but the final moments of the men inside. Now, as technology reveals what once seemed unknowable, it reminds us that history is not lost, only waiting to be understood.